Mount Hope family, it is so good to see you. Yesterday, we had an amazing sermon with Pastor Kevin and all the different missionaries that got to come. It was so impactful just to hear some of their stories. I love that, even coming out of our recent series about testimonies and about thankfulness and just seeing the wonder of what the Lord is doing, like, even seeing that in other countries. It's just an amazing opportunity we had yesterday to talk about that. Um, I was this is I have with me today the wonderful George Berry. Um, and we're just going to talk about, the one of the things that just stuck out to me yesterday in the sermon was as Pastor Kevin was starting off, he talked about, his kids or his grandkids at Cracker Barrel, and the stuffed animal with these eyes of wonder. That he started talking about the story of in Luke chapter 2 about when the angels came, and I love the way that it says this, like the angel when the verse says, suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded the shepherds. And the angel said, don't be afraid, we bring good news. It's interesting as I was just thinking about that and I was pondering through there, like, when the angel of the Lord appeared and these shepherds are surrounded by the radiance of God's glory, right? Like, but then all of a sudden fear came in to try and distract them, and the shepherd and the angel immediately says to the shepherds, don't be afraid, we bring good news, right? We see in 1 John 4, it says that perfect love casts out fear. These angels brought this amazing message of good news, of great joy to the shepherds, and the enemy immediately started off with trying to get them to be in a place of fear, right? But we heard, Pastor Joe talked about last week how the angels were not these like cute little cherubs, but they were these like, big giant warrior angels,
Yeah.
and reading this passage growing up, I always heard that the angels saying, don't be afraid or fear not, as them like commanding the shepherds not to just get rid of their fear, and as I was rereading this recently, or just yesterday when we were hearing about it, I was struck with the angel bringing this perfect love into the situation and casting out fear, like how they're designed for spiritual warfare. They don't fight against flesh and blood. Their battle is in the spiritual, right? And so when he comes in and reveals the presence of the Lord, and fear tries to steal that glory, and he says, fear, get out of here, right? Like, fear not, and these angels, like, in that moment um when our eyes are cleared of fear, finally they're transformed by wonder, like these shepherds are like, just imagining their faces, they're like, oh no, and like,
Yeah.
and the angel's like, fear, like, exit stage left, and they're just, and it completely changes the reaction to the shepherds. They're like, we don't need to be afraid in this moment, we can just, I'm released into being like just awestruck, and like in wonder of what the Lord is doing with the angels coming in. So I don't know, like, what, like, in your life, George, like, what have you seen situations where like you've encountered the glory of the Lord and the fear tried to come in and like take that, like, or tried to,
I would say um it's often even on times where like on Sundays or Wednesday nights where like even if I'm like doing something simple like playing bass or participating in like a worship service, the the fear side of it is you're gonna mess up. You're gonna
Mhm.
screw this note up. You're not gonna do this run right. Um you're like a weakness onto the team because you're not doing this right. That's the fear side of it. But then when you replace it with I get the opportunity to do this weekly, to just join in with like the body of Christ to just worship,
Yeah.
to replicate what's happening in heaven where we're just being there and in the awe of God and being thankful and like crying out to him.
Mm.
And I think it's really important where like even like the angel said like do not be afraid for behold, like he's telling them you have to exchange that fear for something else.
Yeah.
Like you can't, it's not just an empty void or an empty space. It's something where you're making the decision of I'm not going to let fear rest in the place where beholding or being in awe or being in wonder has the right to sit and just really like soak in that
Yeah.
ability to do so.
Yeah. Just being able to, I love the way you said it, like just soaking in that, that presence is so good. Ephesians 1 verses 17 and 18 says, may the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him, having the eyes of your hearts opened or eyes of your hearts enlightened, that you may know what is the hope to which he has called you, the rich and glorious inheritance he has for you, right? Like
Mm,
it is, it's amazing when the Lord, like, that the Lord is the one that actually opens our eyes to those things.
yeah.
The Lord is like, I think about Elijah, and was it Elijah or Elisha was on the hilltop, with his servant, and like, like this army is coming against them, and the servant's freaking out. Fear comes in,
Mm,
right? And then like he's like, God opened his eyes to see, and he sees the host of angels that are around them with the fiery chariots and everything else. It's like it is the Lord that opens our eyes to these things, and um, I think so, it's interesting that having eyes to see, or seeing something that you didn't think was possible, or
yeah.
seeing something beyond your expectation, has the opportunity for fear to enter in, or it has the opportunity to respond with wonder, and it's
Yeah.
only as we partner with the Lord in his perfect love as it casts out the fear response, right? To really have our eyes open to the wondrous glory of what God has for us, or the rich inheritance that he has.
I think it's almost like an acknowledgement of like how little we are able to grasp like everything around us, in
Mm,
like in a sense of when we take things at face value, sometimes fear is the most rational choice where it makes the most sense to be
yeah.
fearful. But when you allow God to like be God and allow him to show you what he's doing and what he's working on in your life, then you allow him to also fill you with that peace and that love and like that serenity of, oh, he has us taken care of. Like it's not
Mm,
something I have to worry about. And then we get to sit back and be like, wow, in something where I should be afraid, I get to sit back and just let God work.
yeah. Yeah, I've been talking to a few people recently just about like how it's funny because like they'll come to me and or my wife, and be like this situation's happening, and like this is like, oh no, and I talked to these people, and like they gave me this advice, and now I'm like so afraid, and we're and so then we start talking about like, well, what does the Lord say? Like
Mm,
going back to like what is the Lord's heart in this situation, and it's not like it is, traditional advice would tell us to be afraid, like what you said. It's like it's not like, yeah, it would make sense to have a fear response in this moment. It would make sense to like give into that,
yeah,
but when the Lord is about unifying his body, when the Lord is about like, inserting peace that surpasses all understanding, peace that is there instead of the fear when it doesn't even make sense for it to be there. It is a
yeah,
totally different thing, and it is a response that needs to be trained, right? Like we're transformed by the renewing of our mind.
mm,
If our mind is automatically written all these fear channels, like when I see this, then I'm afraid, like
yeah,
that's the way that the brain works, is it has those channels built in. But when we get to rewrite those things to like, when this scary thing happens, then my automatic response is to turn to the Lord, who I,
mm,
where my strength comes from, where my help comes from. I lift my eyes up to the hills,
yeah,
like that's a totally different response than what it could be otherwise. And I think that's, I love that Pastor Kevin was talking about just the good news and how we get to partner with, sometimes it does come from angels. Sometimes we're the messengers from the Lord. They get to speak God's love into people's lives. They get to speak like good news into the situation.
yeah,
Um, you know, Pastor Joe and I were talking earlier about like, the aftershock nights, and, going out and just evangelizing, and, how it doesn't have to be like this like scripted, like, okay, have you said the prayer 3 times now? No, wait, twice? No, and then you say that, no, yeah, right? You're like it's easy to get into this like pattern, of like, this, like you're so afraid of like the other person rejecting you or whatever, that
yeah,
you like totally lose the whole point of what you're doing, versus just being able to shine God's heart into people's lives,
yeah,
and just communicate his love to them. It's an interesting It's a little different,
yeah,
like it's like not the way that I grew up in church, not the way that I was taught, but it's so amazing that we get to partner with the Lord in this, and that he does open our eyes. And I found this verse in Psalms 119 verse 18 says, "Open my eyes that I may behold your wondrous things."
mm,
Like it's just like I hope that is the cry of our hearts, and I pray that over each one of us, that the Lord would open our eyes, that we wouldn't, it's not, the onus isn't on us, right? Like the Lord's power would open our eyes, would cast out the fear, that we would be able to see his wondrous things.
yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you, George, for being here with
No
me,
problem.
and I hope you guys have a great week.